Hey Sarah, how are you?
Hey, Sina, I'm good, thanks. How you doing?
I'm very good, thanks. Thank you so much for coming on this episode of Elevating Founders. It's a pleasure to have you on. And I can't wait to talk to you about pitching and pitching best practices and practical tips because so many of the people that listen to this podcast, as well as myself, to be fair, like we're always trying to refine that pitch because,
Yeah,
whether it's, trying to raise investment at any stage of funding, it's so
yeah,
important. And even beyond that, trying to communicate your ideas in a really good way, showing it
yeah.
visually is really important. So yeah, really looking forward to talking to you about that. And I guess it must be a problem that you must have previously faced before joining Pitch.
Yeah, definitely. So my background's in B2B marketing, and rather than kind of pitching for fundraising, my experience was more in building sales decks and working together with sales teams to create materials they could use to pitch products and services to potential clients and existing clients. And it's very similar challenges, like thinking about how do you position your offering, how do you explain it succinctly, how do you do that in a compelling way, how do you make sure that salespeople have got all of the different materials they need, depending on how the way the conversation kind of evolves and for different stages in the relationship with that prospect or client. And yeah, I've also worked with lots of startups, and so yeah, that intersection of thinking about pitching was something that really attracted me to pitch, and also just honestly frustration with the existing tools that are out there.
Mm,
Everything seemed to have like big downsides, and none of the other presentation tools that I was familiar with using had really seemed to kind of adapt to our new expectations of how we use tools to collaborate,
yeah.
particularly remotely. And sort of, I guess, one of my number one tips for entrepreneurs who are thinking about putting their pitch together is it's a collaborative exercise together with your team. So you should be thinking, it's almost like directing a movie. It's like, how can you
Mm,
bring in different people who are going to provide different elements of the story from your team? And then how can you collaborate with sponsors and mentors and maybe existing investors to get feedback and constantly refine that
mm.
pitch? And to do that, you need a tool that's kind of like built for collaboration. And that's what really impressed me about Pitch when I first took a look at the tool.
Would you say that's the element of pitch that really stands out and I guess is better than a lot of other things? Because a lot of the other tools that exist out there aren't really built for building pitch decks. Like you've got PowerPoint, you've got Canva, and then you have a few other small ones, but they're not really built for building pitches. So, like, which element of pitch like which problem does it really solve when it comes to founders and salespeople?
Yeah. So I think it's the collaborative piece for sure. We say that Pitch is presentation software for the Slack generation. So in the same way as people don't use email anymore, people are moving away from PowerPoint to better tools, and that's what Pitch offers. So it's easy to assign people slides. It's easy to comment on slides. It's easy to have a workspace that everyone has visibility on who's working on what. But I think the other things is speed and beauty. So sometimes it feels like you do all of this work to come up with these great ideas and this great storyline of what you want to convey, and then you spend like a week moving boxes around on a slide, and that's just frustrating and it's not very efficient. It's not a good use of your time when you're a founder and you've got a million other things going on.
Yeah.
So it allows you to be a lot more efficient, and Pitch is a very intuitive tool to use. So you don't need to spend a long time learning how to use it. It just kind of like works how you expect it to work. And then it's easier to make things beautiful. So we have a ton of templates, for example, so that founders don't have to, spend a lot of time like starting from scratch from a blank slide. We've
Mm,
already got pitch deck templates, so many different ones in the template gallery, as well as we also have a presentation gallery where you can go and check out a lot of other founders pitch decks for inspiration. So if you're wondering like, oh, how long should my pitch deck be, or like what information should I include, you can
mm.
go and look at like so many different examples of different stages from different industries, and kind of see how other people have done it and think like, oh, what did I like about that, what would I do different?
Yeah.
It's too long,
Yeah.
it's too short. So you're kind of not starting from scratch, and I think that, yeah, that allows you to then focus on the important things that are unique to you, like how you're going to
Mm,
represent your ideas visually, and
mm.
yeah, what your story is.
You mentioned information, and I think given a pitch deck, obviously it needs to be concise and everything. And as a founder, it might be for me anyway. It has been quite difficult to kind of refine everything into a pitch deck because there's just
Mm,
so much. There's so much that you want to communicate because it's
mhm.
really exciting what you're building and everything. You want to communicate everything about the team, whatever, and the market.
Yeah,
So for the founders listening, and I'm sure there's many of them listening now,
yeah,
what questions should a founder answer in a pitch?
yeah. So a pitch is about laying out a journey that you're going to go on to the next sort of milestone in the journey of your company, right? So you need to put yourself in the investor's shoes and think like, what information are they going to need? So they're going to need like, what are you trying to do and why? Like, what's the kind of long-term vision? What's the big problem in the world that you're addressing? They need to understand that very quickly and very succinctly in a way that like your grandmother would probably understand it. And
Yeah.
then they're going to need to get comfortable about what's your plan from getting to A to B. Like, if that's the eventual goal, like what you're going to do in the next 2 3 years, what do you need the money for? Then they need to get to know you and your team.
Hmm.
So and understand why you are the right people to kind of go on this journey and address this major challenge. um, yeah, so I think those are kind of the big pieces, and then it's about making that story real and kind of
Mm.
and like as you said, it's really hard to make it shorter. Like your bias is always going to be like, oh,
Yeah.
I've got this other great thing I want to talk about, like add another slide. And the challenge will be boiling it down. So my advice would be before you even start writing slides, because before you know it, you're going to end up with 25 slides. Before you even do that, sit down and whiteboard out or get in a Notion document or get on a Miro board, however you want to plan it out, and think about the story from the higher level. And
Mm.
that's the point at which you can start saying, okay, CFO, I want you go work on like exactly what our metrics are going to be over the next 3 years, or technical co-founder, you go and outline like why our tech team is uniquely positioned to deliver this in a particular good way. What you start like
Mm.
apportioning out different parts of the story so you're doing it together, and then you start to kind of like see the themes and how the story is going to hang together. Only at that point would I probably like. I would also then test that story with with some
Yeah,
people
yeah,
before
yeah.
you even move it over into slides.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. I thought, yeah, I kind of structured out my slides like before, but I think that story element is very, very important. So yeah, that's wonderful advice. Do you think that story element that you build out in a pitch that is very, fundamental to the quality, do you think
Mm,
that changes given the current sort of economic climate? I know a lot of startups like they might be nervous about raising investment right now. So
mm, mm.
how does that story change given the current situation? And yeah, what advice do you have for startups raising money now?
Yeah. Fundamentally, I don't think it changes hugely, although I think you need to think about two elements. Number one, how can you demonstrate flexibility and resilience to those investors? So show that you have thought through, because there's a lot of uncertainty right now, right? So show that you've thought through like different paths, that you're not super rigid of like, we're going to do this and this is kind of like this way or no other way. Like show you've thought through like, oh, if this happens, we would do this. If this happens, we would do this. To kind of show that you're able to course correct as time goes on. And then the other thing I would think about is like time frame. Pretty much all of the startups we work with, everyone's just thinking about how do you extend your runway. So if anybody's already raised money, that's what I
Mm,
would be thinking about, is like how can you get really disciplined and really rigorous, and give yourself the luxury of time. And for people who are going out to raise now, yeah, I actually think it's maybe not a bad time to raise money. There's still quite a lot of money sloshing around in VC.
mm.
And I think it's time where you've got like, if you've got confidence in your idea and you've got a clear story to tell, I actually think that you'll be pretty well positioned to be raising money right now.
Wow. Okay. Cool. And I guess like for founders right now, I guess raising money, they built that pitch with a good storyline and everything. How can founders follow up after the pitch? And what questions should a founder ask an investor,
Yeah.
after a pitch as well?
I think that's a really important question, Sina, because there's a tendency to think of a pitch or any kind of presentation actually as like the person presenting stands up, delivers their spiel,
Yeah, and then it's
and it's
done.
a very kind of like one way type thing. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever really been a satisfactory way of doing it, but certainly now that's not the expectation. So what we're finding is that lots and lots of founders are sending their pitch decks as a pre-read.
Mm.
And actually, the meeting itself is a conversation, not a pitch. Like they've already maybe read through your slides. And that's where, so Pitch has a feature called recordings, where you can actually record yourself presenting your slides. And it's a great way of practicing your pitch, by the
Yeah.
way, because you can record yourself doing it and then watch yourself back, which is ultimately the way to get like really good practice and also get confident about delivering your pitch. But once you've nailed it, you can then send that out to investors. They can watch your pitch asynchronously, and then you use the in-person meeting or the Zoom call as more of a conversation, because you're also sort of interviewing the investor, right? You shouldn't just be after the check. You should be
Mm.
after someone who you feel confident you can build a long-term collaborative relationship with. And that, they say how like in every good job interview, you should also bring questions for the interviewer. In the same way, I think every founder who's having a conversation with somebody that they're raising funding from should also have questions that they're asking and have an idea of what they want to get out of the relation, as well as the funding, what else they want to get out of the relationship. um,
Mm.
yeah, I think it should be more of a conversation, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree because I've heard absolutely horror stories from people taking a lot of money from the wrong people,
Hmm.
and over the short term they're like, "Oh wow, this is amazing," and then over the long term it really like hurts them,
Yeah.
and it can really damage their business also, not just them as a founder. It could damage their business. So I
Mm.
completely agree with you. It should be a definitely a two-way conversation. I just think, yeah, given maybe the current climate, it's very tempting to just grab money as soon as you see it. But you're saying, be patient. The market's not as bad as you might think, and
Okay.
yeah, you can use these tools to do that two-way interviewing,
Yeah.
which ultimately is how it should be.
Yeah, and it's a confidence piece, right? I think probably it's just psychologically, like the investor will also see if you walk in with that attitude of like we're doing a business deal as partners, that's going to give you like a whole different way of how you're presenting yourself versus
Yeah,
walking in there with that mindset of like, oh, please give me money, please, please,
yeah.
I think that will just come across, for sure.
So you talked about the storyline as well as the slides that you can put on your pitch. There's such a big element of pitching that I think many people kind of miss, and that is the confidence element that you just talked about. It's the body language, it's the eye contact, it's all these other things that people don't really consider, and that goes with any sort of line of communication. I think verbal communication makes up a very small part of actually like how someone perceives what you're trying to communicate to them,
Yeah,
and that obviously goes back to like prehistoric caveman times, right? It's
yeah,
very primal. So, what advice do you have for people when it comes founders when they're coming to raising money, um,
yeah.
focusing on those different elements?
Practice, 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 practice,
Mm,
practice. So yeah, practice it within your team, practice it with your friends and family, practice it. Ask people for help. Ask if you can practice on them. um, part of I think it's so interesting with confidence. Like sometimes it's just about asking for help. People don't want to ask for the help, but actually, like if
mm.
you ask people to help you, they will want to give you feedback. They will want to help you. um, and I think it is confronting, right? Because I don't know about you, but I hate listening to myself back. But I also know that that's how you get better at something.
Yeah, I mean, I listen
You
to
just
my own
have-
voice all the time, and it
right?
doesn't. Believe me, for anyone listening, I record podcasts all the time, and I have to listen to my own voice. It does not get any better.
No, but it's how you get better, and it's kind of like leaning into that discomfort is the thing that then when you're on stage at a pitch competition or whatever, and
Mm.
you've got 250 people looking at you, that's what it's going to give you the confidence. Is like, no, I've been through that discomfort. I know
Yeah,
exactly what I look like and what I sound like when I'm doing this bit. And I've like made my peace with it. That's going to make you, and then that confidence is just kind of, um, yeah, like emanate out of you. I think if you are someone who kind of suffers from like chronic lack of self-esteem, or like really public speaking is like really really something difficult for you, I think as a
yeah.
founder it's also something you should probably like face head on and get some coaching around and get some advice around. And it's another thing you could ask people for support with. A lot of founders now have coaches. I have a great friend of mine, Dave Bailey, has like a founders coach, like a coaching business for founders. It's called Founder Coach, and he works with a lot of the top investors, because a lot of investors now are realizing that like people do need support to work through all of these things, to like
Yeah.
feel feel that confidence. So if it's something that is a real hang up for you, I would consider getting some coaching around it. But otherwise, if it's just something that you haven't practiced a lot, just practice, practice, practice. That's what will give you the confidence.
We talked about the pitch itself, the storyline, we talked about quite a few different things, to be honest. Like, it's been a good
Mhm.
episode so far. The confidence element, the body language, everything.
Mhm.
What other sort of elements of that delivery, that pitch, should founders also look out for that maybe right now they don't really focus on? It's kind of like a missing thing.
Yeah, I think being ready to adapt in as you're giving the pitch by looking at reactions from the audience is probably something that lots of people are uncomfortable with. Like, they've practiced the pitch over and over again, they've like got it down pat, and they're feeling good about it, and
Yeah.
then you can tell that the person you're pitching to is like switched off on a particular topic, and then you've got to have the confidence to like move on, right? And I think that's where practicing it in front of lots of different audiences is really important. So I think
Mm.
about, I love stand-up comedy, and I have so much respect for stand-up
There's
comedians
a lot
because
of parallels between the two. Yeah.
there's a lot of
There's
parallels.
massive. Yeah.
And that's how stand-up comedians, when they're like developing a big show, they will do a lot of like practice shows. So even like Catherine Ryan will be like going and doing like a small comedy club, or even like a pub or something at the beginning when she's got new material,
Yeah.
because she's kind of learning like what lands and and she'll sort of tweak little different bits.
Hmm.
And I think it's the same with your pitch, is learning how to think on your feet and like be comfortable with skipping ahead 3 slides and then skipping back, and then and kind of and being totally cool if there's like 4 slides you don't even cover, and that's fine. You'll send it as a like follow up, and you'll continue the conversation from there. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, I think, and I think the other piece is this collaboration piece. I think people, lots of founders, they think, oh, I've got to be this genius in the corner, like coming up with this amazing story like on my own,
Yeah.
and it all kind of, it falls on me, and it's all my vision. Like, no, like involve other people. Remember that you are that director. You don't have to be the cameraman and the actor and the
Yeah.
scriptwriter and everything. Like, think about what you're good at, and then bring in people that complement areas that maybe aren't, you don't enjoy so much, or aren't your strengths.
I had this bit in my pitch a while ago, like a couple months ago, which really landed when I was pitching to, say, one person. And this is an element that, again, I learned from doing it practice, practice, practice multiple times to just one person, is that I incorporated their name within the pitch itself. So it's
Yeah,
like so say if I would do an example of the customer journey of how our product would work, I'd say, well, yeah, so Sarah would tap her card on this, and then like this would happen. And
yeah,
for some reason, them hearing their name in the pitch itself, they really liked that. And then
yeah,
I also included sometimes, if they were like a very high ticket investor, for instance, I'd also include like their face or their name or both in the
yeah,
screenshots of the actual pitch
yeah,
itself. And that micro personalization they really
yeah,
love.
yeah.
So that's maybe an element that I've learned that's really landed that a lot of
That's a
people
great tip.
may not sort of I may miss.
Yeah, that's a great tip. That works really well with sales presentations as well, by the way. Like, just doing like a very basic mock-up of like their brand, for example, in your product or whatever it might be, like really helps to make it real. I think you can also think about that in terms of the story. So if you're doing your research on the investor, and you learn like, oh, the investor is super into, like, only invests in like these types of businesses, or like really cares about this time horizon, or is particularly interested in like this type of business problem, whatever it is, you can then do a version for them that particularly emphasizes and that really shows that you've thought about it, and that you want to, that you've kind of done your due diligence on them as well.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. These like small elements really take it a long way. I think a lot of founders think they really focus on quantity when it comes to investment because they want to reach out to as many people as possible. But
Yeah,
kind of focusing on a smaller, at least from what I've experienced, focusing on a smaller amount, but then being more personalized to them, the
yeah,
conversion rates is better from what I've seen.
And there's
So
there's like little things you can do. So in Pitch, for example, you can create a custom link. So you
yeah,
can
yeah.
actually like create a link that has the name of the investor in it. And then you can do analytics. So then say you've sent out your pitch deck to like four different investors,
Mm,
you also know which ones have opened it. So you can like find and which ones have like, read the whole thing and like how recently.
yeah.
You can even send them a quick follow up and be like, oh hey, how about we have a meeting to follow up, that sort of thing.
Mm. There's one last question I wanted to ask because I've seen this a lot. Is that many sort of top level athletes have moved into entrepreneurship, and it's a really
Mm.
interesting thing because I guess people might not think that's the done thing. People might not think it's possible to do that. So, what like transferable skills can athletes use when moving from, say, like the field or any sort of sport they're doing into pitching or like business as a whole?
Yeah. So I was a really, really keen university athlete. I was really serious rower. And I really think that rowing probably taught me more that's useful for my business career than certainly than my undergrad, possibly even than my MBA. A lot is about discipline and just like how you form the right habits and how you set a goal and then make a plan of how you're going to get from here to there, right? Also teamwork goes without saying. Like athletes are really good at like they understand how to work with other people. Even if you're doing an individual sport, you're also thinking about the role that your wider team plays, right? um, and just that, yeah, that sense of like who's got strengths in certain areas, like, and also measuring performance, like, which is really important for business, right? Like understanding what you need to, what you need to move, where your where your strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I'm yeah, really fast in this scenario, but like I need to work on my strength or whatever. Like, and having that kind of honest conversation. How you work with coaches as well, how you kind of like get
Mm,
the best out of that coaching relationship. I think there's just so many parallels between, between sport and business. Yeah,
mm.
resilience, learning how to lose, also really important.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. When you talk about coaching there, and then you talk about like pitch coaching before,
Mhm,
for a lot
mhm.
of founders listening, I think there's an element maybe that's not really utilized, and maybe there's a few barriers to it. Maybe it's the expense, maybe it's just like the time element of it.
Yeah,
What difference have you seen when it comes to coaching and any sort of like sponsorship or mentorship or whatever to founders that are doing pitching?
yeah. Huge. So it's a truism, but that's because it's probably true. Have you heard the adage like, if you ask for advice, you'll get money, and if you ask for money, you'll get advice?
Heard that a lot of times.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's true. It is in many ways true. But I think just asking for something is really powerful. Like there's a lot of talk about, oh, mental, particularly when you're talking about underrepresented founders, so like female founders, oh, they need more mentorship, they need more sponsorship, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true, but it has to be targeted. Like, what is the problem? Like, what's the thing they need help with, or what's the thing that they're going to get support from with? Like all of the best mentorship relationships that I've had, both being mentored and providing mentorship, somebody's come to me with like a really specific ask, like, can you help me
Mm.
with this thing? That I've got experience in, or whatever it might be. Or I've gone to them and said, like, I've got this specific challenge that I'm trying to address right now. Can you help me with that? That's much more valuable than a vague, oh, can you be my mentor? Can you be my advisor? Can we have a meeting every
Yeah.
month, or whatever? And then you just get together for an hour, and it's kind of like, okay, what are we doing, sort of thing.
Mm.
Um, and I have noticed that like some entrepreneurs are really good at that. Like some of the founders that I've met, you'll meet them at a networking event or whatever, and they'll email you 2 weeks later with like a really specific ask, like, hey, can you review our latest sales deck and like give us feedback, drop comments? And then I'm like, yeah, of course, like,
Mm.
it's because they asked.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say don't be afraid to ask. You'd be amazed how much people want to help you, and don't be
Mm.
afraid to ask them, but make that ask super specific, and then
Mm.
they're more likely to do it.
Very, very good piece of advice. Very lastly, before we jump into the quick fire questions, I
Yeah.
have to ask you, what are your top 5 tips for pitching? I know you've gone into, like, don't worry about repeating yourself, but because I know you've gone into a lot of them before. So, what are your top 5 tips?
Okay, number one, Simple is best. You don't have to jump into all of the nitty gritty. So, like, keep it short, keep it tight. Number two, craft your story before you commit it to slides. Like, really distill down that story before you start designing slides. Otherwise, you're going to end up with beautifully designed slides you're not going to want to throw away, or they're not going to hang together coherently. Three, collaborate. Do not create a pitch deck in a vacuum or on your own. Share it with lots of people, get feedback, bring in your team. Four would be, get as much feedback as possible from your network, test it, see what's landing, do that kind of stand-up comedian approach. And number five would be flexible. So it's a conversation. Be ready to take the pitch in the direction that the conversation is flowing, rather than like trying to force a certain kind of flow to the pitch.
There you go. That is wonderful advice. So now the quick fire question before we wrap up the podcast. If you could go to the pub with any entrepreneur, who would you choose? That could be from past or present.
Got to be Serena Williams. Like, I mean, she's the greatest of all time. What more do you need to say?
An athlete turned entrepreneur, yeah.
Incredible
Good example.
Sportswoman. Like, amazing, inspiring parent. I would have a lot to talk to her about, I think.
Secondly, what is a startup you are loving at the moment and why?
Yeah, I would highlight Syndi Health, SYNDI. It's actually a startup. I met the founders at London Tech Week. They were super impressive. It's an app. It's an app for mental health services. So there's a ton of great mental health apps out there, but like, how do you choose what's right for you? And it's also a platform business. So it's about not just users of those apps, but also healthcare providers and employers. And kind of, I love a platform business, particularly from a marketing perspective, because from a marketing perspective, it's a bit like 3D chess, which makes it super interesting. So yeah, go check out Syndi Health. Ben and his co-founder, they're great, and I'm really excited to see what they do next.
That's a cool one. And lastly, fill in the blank. To be a founder, you must be
resilient.
There we go. That's a lovely message to end the podcast on. Yeah. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was such a pleasure having you on Elevating Founders. How can people stay in touch with you and what you're doing, and also obviously checking out Pitch?
Yeah, so definitely go to pitch.com. Check out particularly the template gallery, the presentation gallery, the blog. There's also a ton of resources on our blog. So yeah, if you're looking for inspiration of how to put together your pitch, that should be your first destination. You can also follow us on all socials, and then send us, if you've got a pitch deck you're really proud of, send it my way. You can reach me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again, Sarah, for coming on Elevating Founders, and I'm sure we'll speak very soon. Thank you so much.